A lot of these wrestlers got so addicted that they couldn't stop, even though they knew that so many guys had already died from them. You know, they were addicted and they didn't know how to even, they didn't even know who to talk to about it.
The role of deceased stampede wrestlers exemplifies the problem. Apparent victims of wrestling, its high-risk lifestyle, or both. Bret Hart's younger brother Owen plunged more than 70 feet to his death in Kansas City during a daredevil stunt to rappel into the ring from the roof. Among those who had fatal heart attacks, Andre the Giant, Biff Wellington, Gary Albright, Greg Gillies, all still in their earlier mid-40s. Brian Pillman's coronary at just 35 was attributed to drug abuse. David Sheldon collapsed and died at 43 of unknown causes. The Junkyard Dog had a well-known drug problem and was killed in a car crash. And then there's Davey Boy Smith, the Dynamite Kid's partner, dead of a heart attack at 39. Steroid abuse was identified as a likely factor. As for the Dynamite Kid, he'd become a mere shadow of his former self, no longer able to wrestle, reduced to watching his old matches all day on television.
When that wrestling ability diminished, so too did his self-esteem, his self-worth. I remember him watching especially the Japanese tapes, his Tiger Mask matches, just over and over. It was just an obsession with him, and just regretting that he couldn't do that anymore. It was quite sad, actually.
Weighing 249 pounds, Chris Benoit!
Though Chris Benoit was still on top of the wrestling world, by 2005 his path seemed eerily like that of his former idol. He'd reconciled with his wife, but Benoit's father says his son suffered severe depression, fueled by steroids, taking painkillers after a broken neck, with frequent bouts of paranoia.
Chris was totally paranoid. They said that the chauffeur that actually used to drive him home from the airport at times said, Chris would tell him, take a different route. I don't want people to follow me home. They had their son in a lockdown school so that no one would kidnap him. They moved into this new house with large fencing all around, went out and got 2 trained German shepherds to protect the house because, people were after them.
By the end of 2005, Benoit had attended the funerals of over a dozen former wrestling colleagues. But there was one from which he wouldn't recover. His best friend in wrestling was Eddie Guerrero. In November that year, Guerrero collapsed and died of heart disease after a history of substance abuse. He was only 38. For Chris Benoit, it was more than he could take.
And all of a sudden, Chris starts quoting scripture, which is so unlike him. And how did I find out about that? By reading his diary back in 2005.
That diary begins just days after Guerrero's funeral, weaving biblical passages with dark thoughts written directly to his dead friend.
I think we can see that the Eddie Guerrero death was really the beginning where he started to lose touch with reality. He was writing letters to Guerrero from the beyond. Some of it has tinges of Christianity, anxiety and depression are seen in his own writings.
The diary also contains repeated references to his wife and son. But where Benoit seems in despair addressing Guerrero, he writes lovingly about Nancy, whom he calls his best friend, and about little Daniel, the boy who was the light of his life.
What do you believe might have been the role of Daniel in this?
Chris loved Daniel. He didn't love him, he adored him. Absolutely adored him. Chris would be on the road, he'd be dragging his rear end, he'd be, you'd talk to him, he'd seem down, depressed, and it just, and you'd say, boy, this life, is sure taking it out of him. I don't know why he doesn't get out. And you'd say, how's Daniel doing? And his whole demeanor would change. I mean, it would just light up because he just loved that kid so much.
For Mike Benoit, it would make what happened next even more incomprehensible. On June 25, 2007, police in a suburb of Atlanta were called to the Benoit house. Inside, they found Nancy Benoit and 7-year-old Daniel, strangled in their beds. Chris Benoit was hanging in his home gym, suspended from the neck by the steel cables he used for his workouts.
My world was extremely black. Our family, I mean, it was unbelievable. It was horrific. I can't tell you how bad it was.
If the untimely deaths of so many other wrestlers hadn't grabbed public attention, this one would.
Police say Benoit murdered his wife and son on the weekend, then killed himself.
It struck me as somewhat bizarre that perhaps he would even be in the home with their deceased bodies for some length of time.
To those who knew him best, it was an agonizing mystery, even with his wife's accusations of domestic violence.
I mean, that was very plausible, but his son, something was very wrong.
And friends like Jake Roberts also believed there had to be more to the story.
Well, and when I go to heaven or hell, wherever I go, and if God looks at me and I say, God, devil, did he do these horrible things that the public and the press or whoever has said, he did that? You know what I'm gonna tell them? Screw you, you're a liar. I don't believe that. Not the man I knew.
And Jake the Snake may well be onto something, as we'll show you after the break, when doctors begin to unlock the secret hidden inside Chris Benoit's brain.